Where there's a will, there is a way. Welcome, everyone, to All Things Awesome Live. This is Sherry Dunleavy, your Inspirationista. And this is a segment that we do every week so that we can meet ordinary people who are choosing to live their lives in extraordinary ways. And I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy Gamble, and then I'm going to let her take it away from here. She's a national award-winning mental health advocate and a mental health speaker. That's what she does now, but she is an Olympian, a former NCAA Division I athlete, an author, a marketing and sales standout for Fortune 500 companies, and she has a master's degree in organizational leadership and a bachelor's degree in communications. And even though she's had a life full of accomplishments, she's also struggled. And that's what happens with many of us. We have these struggles, but the important thing is that you get back up and you keep getting back up. And then you take the lessons that you learn and you share them with others. And that's what she is doing now. So I welcome Amy Gamble. Thank you very much. We made this work. We made it work. So I'm so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Sherry. I'm glad we were able to be persistent and it ended up working out.
That's right. You know, you fall down, but you get back up and you fail your way forward, correct?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about young Amy. Amy was a athletic standout in high school and college, and then that led to the Olympics. How did that all happen?
Well, I started out as a high school All-American basketball player. And when I was a junior in high school, I actually made an Olympic sports festival team, which was a mini Olympics that they would hold every year in the United States. And I made that in basketball as a junior in high school. And while I was at the Olympic Sports Festival, a sports writer who became a friend of mine from New York took me to see this sport called team handball played. And he turned to me and he said, just planted a seed and said that when you are done playing basketball, you should play team handball because I think you would be very good. And then when I transferred from the University of Tennessee, I went there on a basketball scholarship. And I ended up transferring. I decided that I didn't want to let my Olympic dreams be finished, and I decided to switch sports. And so I became a 1988 Olympic athlete in team handball.
That is so amazing. So what was that experience like? Were you able to soak it all in when you were there?
Absolutely. And really what was awesome was the 3 years before the Olympics, we lived together for about 2.5 years in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we got to travel all over the world because in team handball, there was not a lot of competition in the United States. So by the time I was 23, I'd been to about 20 countries all around the world. And then actually getting to the Olympics in Seoul, Korea, and I still have that moment in time locked into my memory of walking into Olympic Stadium. And it was such a proud feeling and really just amazing. And I always tell people that was my reassurance that dreams do come true.
And that is so important because from that point, you think you're on top of the world and the world is your oyster. Mm-hmm. And for a while, that truly was. I mean, you went on to, bachelor's degree and master's degree working in corporate America, but you've also had struggles as well.
I have. I started struggling with depression pretty bad when I was a college sophomore, and that's actually what led to my transfer. But I was able to sort of overcome that and pick myself back up and keep on pursuing my corporate goals and dreams. And then I got really, really sick. It was actually about 20 years ago this year that I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And it was a really rough journey. It takes sometimes between 8 to 10 years before people really get stabilized and balanced with bipolar disorder. But for me, it took a little longer than that. It took probably about 12 or 13 years for me to get really stable.
So I know that you, I mean, I followed you when I was on News 9 and we celebrated with you. I did not know this part of your story until recently. And then I went to hear you speak. You were on a panel of inspiring women, and your story just spoke to me so immensely. And it was just absolutely fascinating because you've lived life at the highest highs, but you've also lived life at the lowest lows. Tell us about that lowest low.
Well, about 7 years ago, I had been seeing a psychiatrist for like 5 years. And I went to her and I said, I'm not really happy with how the medications are making me gain weight. And I'd gained like 60, 70 pounds. And I really wanted to get off the medication. So she said, sure, go ahead. So I got off this one medication in particular. And about 7 or 8 months later, I had the worst manic and then psychotic episode that I've ever had. And I ended up driving across the country, getting off of an exit in Montana. And then I inadvertently, in my confused state of mind, I went into someone else's house and made coffee and made a fire. And then I decided if I was going to stay there, I needed to go get supplies for the winter. So I got back in my car and I drove up the road, ended up lost in the Idaho National Forest. And eventually, after 3 days, I was rescued. And I got taken to a hospital in Idaho where I spent about 3 weeks. And the best thing that happened to me there was I had a nurse educator who taught me a lot about bipolar disorder. And the one thing that she said that I've never forgotten was, you have bipolar disorder, it's a brain disorder, and it's not your fault. And that just sort of relieved all the guilt and shame that I had felt for so many years. And then remember the log cabin that I went into?
Yes,
when I was released from the hospital, I was arrested for going into that log cabin. And I got taken back to Montana and spent about 3 weeks in a jail cell until my case could work its way through the system. So it was definitely the lowest of all lows. And you're right, as I was sitting in this jail cell, it was about 8 by 8 feet and very small. And a corrections officer came in, he handed me a stack of magazines. And I started leafing through the magazines. And on the front cover of a magazine was a person who had been to my home and I'd had dinner with several times. And it was essentially a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking, this is so surreal. How am I ever going to overcome this? How am I going to rebuild my life after this has happened to me? And that's what I did. I was writing in a journal while I was in jail. If anybody's ever been in jail, you know there's not a lot of things to do while you're there. So I wrote in a journal when I was reading, and I just came to this point where I said, you know, I can either choose to feel sorry for myself and give up, or I can take everything that I've learned and try to go out and help as many people as I can. And so that's the pathway that I've taken. And in the last 4 years, I've been able to speak to over 12,000 people. And my blog has reached about 26,000, and continue to do a lot of work in educating and hopefully lifting people up along the way.
So let me ask you, when you were in this, I just can't imagine, you know, you go through highs and lows in life, but you're in this and someone tells you it's not your fault. I can't even imagine if you didn't have mental illness, how hard it would be to pull yourself back up. Yep. But when you're just trying to hold yourself together, you know, do you think that your Olympic training helped with that at all? The grit that you have to get back up and to not give up helped you in that?
I do. I think being an athlete, really along the way, you know, you're always working for goals, small goals and then larger goals. I do this now with myself, setting small, doing small things and then working towards the larger goal. So breaking it down and having that attitude of rebounding. I'm not going to lie to you, it wasn't easy. It was a very hard journey to go through. But I was determined, really determination and the desire to not give up.
So Amy, going through this journey, and getting back up on your feet? What kind of support system did you have? Did you feel like you had to do this by yourself, or did you have a good support system surrounding you and helping lift you up and carry you through this? Or was this something that you had to do yourself?
I would say my family, my
Mm-hmm.
mother, my sister, a couple of my nieces were really critical along my pathway. And then also I would say my faith and the people that I met along my journey with uh, really getting over my anger at God, because I was so angry that this had happened to me. And I just kept thinking, why me? And I had pastors, Tim and Linda Seiler from the
Mm-hmm.
Experience Church, who really have supported me all along my course of journey and have been extremely loving and compassionate of my past, and just continue to this day to encourage me. So that was a really big help for me.
As well. What kind of mental health care, self-care do you
Mhm.
have, and what kind of care are you continuing to have?
I went to a therapist pretty
Mm-hmm.
regularly for a very long time, and I also saw a psychiatrist in the beginning for about once a month for 3 years, which was pretty intense. And then now I see her currently every 3 months. I read incessantly, so
Mm-hmm.
I also read a lot of stories about people who were doing the things that I wanted to do. When I decided that I wanted to become a mental health speaker, I went out and looked and watched all kinds of videos of different people who were speaking. And I came across this one gentleman whose name is Nick Voici.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick Voici is an Australian. He currently lives in California, but he was born without any legs and any arms. And I watched his video, and I rewatched it over and over again. And I was just like, wow, if Nick Voici can do this, I know I can do this too. Because I'm very blessed in many ways, and with the experiences that I had from my past corporate America jobs and skill building and things like that, uh, I had a good platform to work from. So um, those are some of the things that I do.
Okay, so let's get into the speaking. When you speak to audiences of all ages.
Mhm.
You were telling me, you went to a whole school system and you talked to the littles through the the kids that were in high school. So I
Yeah.
know you have to speak a different language when you're speaking to
Mhm.
different age levels. But what is the main mission of your message? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to connect to um, people that may be struggling with mental illness, or are you trying to connect with people who have people that they have in their life that have mental illness, or all of the above?
Well, initially it started as wanting to reduce the stigma. And my
Mm-hmm.
whole mission was reducing the stigma one person at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've evolved into kind of a 5-point key message talk that I give. And every one of my talks are customized because every
Mm-hmm.
audience is different. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what that audience would want to hear, and also what messages that I want to communicate. So I do a thing where I talk about believing in yourself. Um, Dreams do come true. Hope never fails. Mental health matters, and never give up. Those are my 5 core messages. Now, when I speak at an upcoming talk, I'll talk a lot about mental illness, and talk about facts and figures and statistics and things like that. But I always try to weave in personal story, because that seems to be what resonates most with people.
And I mean, you have this American dream story too. I mean, you were a high school athlete that had some talent, that was able to go. You played under Pat Summitt, correct?
Yes, I
I mean,
did.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
golly, just that in itself is truly amazing. But then to become an Olympian and realize your dreams, I mean, you can speak on that and encourage so many people with that message.
Hmm.
But then you can, encourage people for when you fall,
Hmm.
of how you can get back up. and how you can mess up and how you can make mistakes or how you can get sick and how your life can still be okay. And you offer so much hope.
Yeah, that is the key that I think that people tell me very frequently, and I didn't think of myself as sort of an inspirational speaker, but people tell me that I'm inspiring, and that's a great gift to be able to communicate to others. One of the talks I'm really looking forward to is I'm giving a talk to 300 inmates in a correctional facility coming up in June, and
Wow.
so that really is about overcoming adversity and teaching people about when you fall and we make mistakes, no matter what it is, we can overcome anything.
Absolutely. But there's a difference in, and you never know, but there seems to be a difference. Mental health is not your fault. Okay. That is not your fault. But sometimes the choices we make, the consequences are, and so you have to make sure, but it doesn't matter because it's the getting up and getting back at it. That's so important. I think it's so many speakers, and I'm learning this as I'm growing my speaking career, is that we have something that we want to share with the world, something that was a life experience that changed us so profoundly that we feel we must share this information with others. Do you feel the same way?
I do. I feel really passionate about educating people, particularly about mental illness. So, when we think about mental health, everyone has mental health, but not everybody has mental illness. And so teaching people what we can do, not only to take care of ourselves, but to help our loved ones. So I tend to do a lot of coaching and things like that. But I'm definitely passionate in wanting to communicate that no matter what it is, we can overcome anything.
So let's go back a little bit. So what can you do, and what steps can you, if you are dealing with a mental illness, what can you do, to help yourself to get that help or to become better? What are some of the tips that you offer people that are suffering from mental illness?
I think, first of all, it depends upon how you're entering the system. If you're entering the system with a serious mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, then you're entering in crisis, and you're going to have to rely on that setting to get a diagnosis. For other people who might not have serious mental illness, the process then would be the same after you've gotten out of that hospital in a crisis. So the key is finding a really good practitioner. So if you're just starting to struggle with anxiety or depression and you don't feel like you need to see a psychiatrist, see a primary care doctor and get the help that you need. I'm a big proponent of going to therapy, and I think that's really important, although it's not the only option. There are other options that you can do, like art therapy, equine therapy. There's a whole host, meditation, mindfulness, things like that are really, really beneficial. The biggest thing that I try to communicate to people is that it's so important to learn about how that diagnosis affects you. Because as Kay Jamison from Johns Hopkins says, when you've seen one bipolar patient, you've seen one bipolar patient. So the illnesses manifest themselves a little bit differently in everyone. And so it's really important to learn what those symptoms are and how they affect you personally.
So you mentioned get yourself a good doctor. What is a good doctor? What are some of the things that you should be looking for?
Someone who listens to you, who will take your feedback, who will treat you with dignity and respect. So if you walk in and somebody's really patronizing, then when you walk out the door, don't ever go back. You want to have that a good professional relationship with someone. And you'll know when you don't connect with someone, you're going to know it. And when you do connect, you're going to find that you're going to have far better outcomes with your health. And so it would be no different if you had a serious diagnosis like cancer. And you might not you might seek a second opinion, right? So if that diagnosis doesn't seem to be fitting, or the
Mm-hmm.
medications they're prescribing don't seem to be working, then, you know, try somebody else.
Now, when I saw you speak, there was a woman in the audience that just that really connected to you, that really was full of questions, especially directed toward your story. And from what I gathered and what I surmised, I'm guessing that someone she loves, is suffering from mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about the people who love people with mental illness? How can we best support them? You know, because, with manic highs and lows, what do you advise? And what were some of the things that maybe your friends and family got right? And maybe what were some of the things that maybe you would like to see improved in other people and other relationships?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can say that, first of all, I'm actually a family member as well, because my mother has bipolar, and also my sister has bipolar disorder. So I've been, before I was even diagnosed, I've been on the other end of that. Mm-hmm. And as a family member, it's really, really difficult. We call mental illness a no casserole illness, because when your loved one goes into the hospital, people tend to disappear. So it becomes really hard on the family members. So I would say that for those who have friends who know that their friends have loved ones who are suffering or dealing with mental illness, that it's so important to pick up the phone and call them, ask them how they're doing, invite them to lunch, invite them to dinner, bring them over something. Don't be afraid to at least ask the question, "Are you okay?" Or mm-hmm. I know this might be hard for you. So the worst thing that can happen is for everybody just to go away. And mm-hmm. I know that, I've experienced that directly. And I've also had family members who lost their friends, or even other family members who walked away because it was a difficult and long journey. So primarily when I talk about this, I'm talking about more serious mental illness, but it can also be that way if someone has anxiety or depression. Mm-hmm. And, depending upon what the struggle was like and whether or not somebody has a co-occurring disorder, there can be challenges along the way. And the best thing that we can do is just try to be there for each other and hold that space for each other, to be honest and truthful.
Yeah, be there and show up. That's kind of why I wrote my book, to tell people what they can do and say to love and support through. But I think we need to really look at mental health a little bit differently, because sometimes you can get shut down and then you take that no as a permanent no. Mm-hmm. And, that's probably what's challenging about that. But, there's other ways that you can reach out and love people and support them through until they're ready to engage in conversation or have a face-to-face visit. I mean, even a simple, message on a voicemail can be encouraging and uplifting, even if the other person doesn't feel like speaking.
That's right.
At the time. Just don't give up.
That's right.
Give up.
Yep.
So speaking of books, you've written a book. Tell us about your book.
So I wrote a book called Bipolar Disorder, My Biggest Competitor. And the whole premise was that even though I've been on a world stage with incredible competition and been to the Olympics, there's nothing that has challenged me more than recovering and dealing with bipolar disorder on a day-to-day basis. So I talk about my experiences, some of which we talked about today. And then I talk about how I recovered, how I was able to do that, and point out, what people can turn to and some resources that people can go to in order to be able to learn about bipolar disorder and or to help themselves recover.
Recover, is that the same as cure?
Not the same as cure. So recovery is kind of a lifelong journey, because we have these illnesses are chronic illnesses for the most part. I mean, there's some exceptions when people might have one episode of depression based on something that happened in their lives and they might never experience depression again. But for me, I live with a chronic health condition, And so I'm going to have to deal with it all my life. But it doesn't mean that every day is terrible, horrible, and bad. It just means that I have to learn how the mood changes affect me and try to push through when I have more depressive episodes, and try to guard against having any kind of manic episode. So that's, that's what's important.
And do your loved ones, do they have like telltale signs that they look for just to make sure that you're doing okay? And you the same for them?
I do closely pay attention to how my mom is doing in particular, and just sort of watching different behaviors. I have a sister who will tell me, you know, pretty directly when she thinks that something is wrong, because she has been there with me through the journey that I've been on, and has been a huge supporter and help for me. So she keeps me in a narrow line.
But the good news is it's no different than maybe having diabetes and monitoring that. It's just something that you live with and you monitor, and you can live a full and fulfilling life, right?
Yeah, that's true. The biggest difference between a mental health condition and physical illness is that there has been just so much stigma around it, and it's hard. I would probably say it's harder than diabetes, though diabetes is a horrible illness. It's harder because we don't have a test. We can't check our blood, to see if our medications are the right levels or things like that. And very often some of the medications don't work. So the other thing is that mental illness affects our thinking, emotions, and behavior. And that gets a little tricky when we're not in balance.
So where can people get in touch with you? Because if they want someone to speak, and my dog has joined the interview with us, so please forgive me there, but where can people get in touch with Amy if they would like her to come and speak to their group, organization, or school? And where can we get your book?
Well, you can get the book on Amazon. It's in paperback or Kindle, either one. In order to find me, you can certainly find me through Facebook Messenger. I also have a blog that I write called sheddinglightonmentalhealth.com, and you can connect with me through the contact page on sheddinglightonmentalhealth.com.
Okay, so before we leave this interview, why, or after the interview is posted, why don't you put that in the comments so that people have a direct link that way? Would that be okay?
Sure.
You can do that for your book, and you can also do that for your blog. Anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with as before we call it a day?
I just want everyone to know that no matter what it is that they're dealing with, what they're struggling with, that you can overcome just about anything. And the most important thing is never giving up hope, and never giving up on yourself.
Well, I thank you for not giving up, because you are providing a lot of hope to a lot of people. Amy, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That's going to do it. That's going to do it for another edition of All Things Awesome Live. I want to thank our guest, Amy Gamble. If you would like more information, you can join our Facebook group. It's Facebook, All Things Awesome with Sherry Dunleavy, your Inspirationista. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and we'll introduce you to another extraordinary person next time. Have a great day.